and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies.
Up next, it really seems like Democrats have learned absolutely nothing. At least Vice Presidential nominee and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, if his recent comments made at a Texas event featuring former congressman and failed presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, well, if Tim Walz's comments here are anything to go by, they've learned nothing, and they're in for a very, very rude awakening in the political future. Here is the main thing Tim Walz said that, honestly, I was a little bit stunned by. Take a listen.
The question is, how do we speak about and plan for the inclusivity and diversity of opinion that we need to rebuild this country when those terms are being so demonized by the people holding power right now?
Well, Sammy, thank you. And to all the young people who are here, I just pause for a moment and look around and look at, I'm especially talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint us on a regular basis in this country, but not this group. Not this group. We let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
Y'all, I almost struggle to believe he's serious. His notion, his idea, is that the Democrats should double down on wokeness and DEI, identitarian stuff. That they should embrace that harder and embrace their position on immigration, which was a hot mess under Joe Biden, even harder. And he thinks that's what's going to help them win. Is he insane? Does he know nothing about what motivated voters and what they were explicit about rejecting at the ballot box? People don't want that. They might not necessarily want all the super right-wing stuff Trump is doing, but they don't want that either. And they can't give it up, this toxic identity politics. He's asked a question about, how do we sanitize DEI? How do we make it acceptable again and stand to these values? And immediately makes a joke crapping on white men. This is like when Jasmine Crockett, the new rising star, went off about mediocre white boys. Newsflash, white men are a huge part of this country. Pretty important part, with a lot of votes. And I mean, you look at how even young men, even young minority men, swung massively towards Trump this past election. It's because they feel, and they're not wrong to have perceived this, at least in online and media circles and education and colleges, that the Democratic Party or the left of center establishment and ethos doesn't like them or looks down on them for things about them they can't change and didn't choose, like simply being a man or being white or being heterosexual, God forbid any of these heinous things. That is cancerous politics. And anybody, no matter how far left they are, that just can see these things clearly should understand that. But the guy they just put up as VP thinks they just need to do woke harder. They've learned nothing, as far as I can tell, and they will continue to lose. And I just get so frustrated with the Democrats because I don't know that they really believe any of the things that they say they believe. At least a lot of I think rank and file Democrats, so voters, people you meet on the street, your aunt, your uncle, I think they genuinely hold a lot of these beliefs. But I think a lot of the elected officials are complete and utter frauds, like Tim Walz apparently is, because remember all that hubbub about Republicans are a threat to democracy and they are election deniers and all this. I thought they overstated it at times for sure, but I agreed with them on the central thrust of that criticism. I've always thought Trump lost in 2020. Maybe the election wasn't perfectly fair in some ways, but frankly, the elections never are. And I thought the pity party and the attempt to reverse the result and all of that was disgraceful. So Democrats, in my book, have always had a legitimate criticism of the Trump Republicans about not believing in democracy. But do they really believe in it themselves? Take a listen to this.
I hope they all have seen the reports from cybersecurity experts that they've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that shows some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. My biggest fear is that we're not going to make it to the midterms. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah. Well, this one's the core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote. This is one of the things, though, that this is going to take power to the streets.
So this lady comes up here with these harebrained, fact-free conspiracy theories about them hacking the votes, and he just basically slightly dodges it and kind of affirms that they're going to do better and compete better. Really? Y'all are the democracy warriors. You can't tell this woman, no, I'm sorry, we lost fair and square. I'm not going to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole. We've got to be better than the Republicans. No, you just dodge it and move on, because they don't actually believe this stuff, at least not at a particularly deep or principled level. I will never forget this. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we had a moderate Republican congressman here, Peter Meyer. I know him a little. He's a good guy. Don't agree with him on everything, but he's a guy, a good character, a moderate Republican type. He voted to certify the 2020 election results, and that made the MAGA hardcore base, at least some of it, very upset. So they ran a primary challenger against him for the Republican nomination when he ran for Congress again, named John Gibbs, who was like you can't imagine a more radical and fringe person than this. I mean, he had disturbing views on women and all sorts of things, and he was an election truther. So you had this very close primary contest where this moderate Republican was running against this very fringe MAGA Republican who was an election denier. And it was super close. It came down to just a couple percentage points. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, you can look this up, came in with huge funding in favor of John Gibbs, the election denier, and against the Republican who did the right thing and certified the results, to help John Gibbs narrowly win the nomination, which he did, because they thought he would be easier to beat in the general election. And he was. They did win that seat. And Meyer might have kept that seat or beaten the Democrats. But they chose incredibly cynical political calculations over any pretense of believing in democracy and the rule of law and how important these things are. If you actually gave a crap about any of that, you wouldn't actively promote election-denying Republicans and sabotage and harm the careers of those who did the right thing. You'd do the opposite of that. And Democrats did this across the country in races and elections in 2022. It was an incredibly profound disgrace, and I'll never forget it, because it just was kind of the nail in the coffin that when you hear elected officials, 95% of them, when they say these grandiose values they believe in, it is all BS. They will say and shift and do anything to get close to power. Many of them are narcissists, and they will simply do anything and contort themselves into however many pretzels to get there. That's why I'll probably never run for office. Some of you guys ask me about are you going to run for something? Like, why do y'all hate me and want me to suffer? And two, I'm too honest to ever get elected or win, because I actually say what I think, and I have certain things I believe in that I wouldn't just flip to win an election or get a donor, so I wouldn't have a shot anyway. Now, just one final thing from this big event that he did down in Texas, that I'm sorry, you could not waterboard this information out of me. He told the story about him and his 18-year-old son that was hilarious, but embarrassing. I don't know why you would tell people this voluntarily. Take a listen.
I got an 18-year-old, Gus, and I'm with Gus out there, and I'm having one of those dad talks with him. I was giving Gus my wisdom on what he had done wrong. I was because I know these things, right? I'm the dad. In the middle of it, he gives me the old, says the guy who got his ass kicked by Donald Trump. And I'm like, okay.
I will say it again. You could not waterboard that information out of me. That is really funny, but very embarrassing and kind of emasculating as a father that your teenage son just disrespects you and sasses you like that. And look, I know that happens, but why would you volunteer that information? Of course, MAGA is running with this clip and dunking on it because it's hilarious. And you just owned yourself. You just committed an own goal on live television. What is this dude thinking? You don't give your enemies food and fuel to dunk on you with. And it's telling that even the children of Democratic Party officials, like the teenagers, Gavin Newsom has a teenage son who loves Charlie Kirk, are leaning Republican. Like Gen Z is, or even young Gen Alpha is swinging far to the right, or to maybe not far, but more to the right. When we used to have young people always being, the most liberal ones, all of a sudden we have a ton of young people who are swinging to the right significantly. And that's a very surprising development that I'll probably go over in more depth soon. But if even the kids of these people are feeling this way, that's a good sign that most of their generation, or a huge chunk of it, is, because they're surely inundated with Democrat agenda and beliefs all around them, and maybe they rebel against that a little bit, but also it's pretty remarkable that they're dunking on him like that. And again, I can't get over it. Why would you voluntarily offer up that information? Other than that, though, other than a couple tiny little things, Tim Walz and the Democrats are just doing amazing.